This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight, along with Mr. Timothy Renner, joining me once again, we'll be talking with Michael
Robartes.
Robartes. Okay. I want to throw an ES at the end, like Robartes.
Right. No, don't get fancy on that.
And you've written a book with your friend Paul Conroy called The Rabbit Hole Experience on Sasquatch's spirits and the people who see them.
That's right.
So why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself first?
Okay. I am a paranormal investigator. I run a team called Scientific Paranormal, which nominally operates out of the central New York area, although we've all kind of migrated, so it's a little more scattered now. But we were based in Syracuse originally.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
So not far from me at all.
No, right in that area. I've been investigating for roughly, 13 years, something like that. And my co-author, Paul Conroy, is an investigator for the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. And he and I tend to go out. I'm kind of interested in the Sasquatch phenomenon as well, so we spend a lot of time out in the woods together, knocking on trees and such, and having conversations out there. We kind of swap stories back and forth, and we realize that there's a lot of both similarities and differences between the way people experience these sorts of things that we're dealing with. And so that was really the motivation for the book, was to sort of look at the side of the actual witnesses rather than talk about proving or disproving a phenomenon. Think more about the fact that people are having these experiences and what that means for them moving forward.
Yeah, and you do a good job with that. You have you go through an array of different experiences that you guys have had and other people have had, and how people respond to it. And you're calling that the rabbit hole experience.
Yeah, that's a term that we use. We kind of developed over the years for an experience in which a person comes face to face with something that they thought was impossible. And what we found is when that happens, there's this whole psychological cascade effect where they are sort of trying to fit this new information into their belief structure in a way that will do the least damage, and with greater or lesser degrees of success, depending on the case.
And what would have been your rabbit hole experience?
That's a good question. We don't really have that in the book. I guess I would have to say that I kind of fell into the hole in stages. There were some early experiences in my youth that I'm kind of still trying to dig through, so I don't really get into that too much. But there was a second stage around 2009 when this cabin that I was living in, I ended up having some what I would basically classify as negative entities taking up residence, and something that I had to deal with over the course of almost an entire year. And that was really my motivation for getting into this work more formally, was the fact that I knew that sort of when you're going through these kinds of things, you don't really have anybody that you can talk to, because everybody's going to think you're nuts, and you can't go to the police, and you can't, they need somebody to talk to. And so that's sort of why we're there. We want to make sure that we're available, where if somebody's going through something like this, they know that there are people out there who will take them seriously and come in to help them out.
Okay. And yeah, that seems to be a little bit of a difference. You talk a lot about not so much being in it trying to find evidence per se, because there's already so much out there that's circumstantial, but you're doing it for the people who are having these issues.
Yeah, I mean, we get into it later in the book. I'm convinced that this thing that we're calling the rabbit hole experience requires a personal experience. Without that, I think you just can't break through that line into what I would call like true belief, I guess. We divide, we have some formal stuff in the book talking about objective and subjective beliefs and things like that, but no matter who shows you like secondhand evidence, even if you completely trust the person that's showing it to you, and like you would go on a lie detector and say they're not lying to you, it still doesn't have the same impact. And we sort of toss that around a lot, trying to figure out why is that? Why does that not convince somebody? And I think it's just because deep in your psyche somewhere, there's this escape hatch where it could possibly be a hoax, or it could be a misidentification or something else. And as long as that possibility is there, you don't have to make that shift. Whereas if you go outside your house and turn the corner and there's an 8-foot primate digging through your garbage, like there's just no way out of that. You can try all you want, but you're going to have to fix this new information into your brain somehow.
You also talk about the difference between like the ghost stuff you're doing and the Bigfoot cryptid sort of research in the sense that if someone sees a Bigfoot, you're lucky to see a Bigfoot once in your life,
right?
Whereas like the spirit stuff, it can follow you,
right?
So dealing with it requires a different sort of approach.
Yeah, and I think a different attitude, which is why Paul kind of says in the book that anytime somebody sort of questions the Bigfoot phenomenon, he tells them, well, go out in the woods and sort of, see what it looks like, see how big it is and that kind of thing, and look for yourselves. Whereas I'm a little more hesitant on the spirit side. I don't know. I think that maybe most people are better off just not knowing what's out there. And, people will come to me and say, I don't believe in any of that stuff. And I say, well, that's fine then. If you should start, give me a call.
Right. Tim, do you have sort of a rabbit hole experience, something that kind of changed you?
Well, and we talked about this on the air, so I know like kind of exactly what he's talking about. And we talked about like for Site 7, for instance. I was going out there and things were happening. We'd get a stone thrown at us, or we'd see a flash of movement, and we recorded weird stuff when we weren't there. Very, very, very strange sounds that are oddly matching up with sounds that people are recording in Oregon and so forth, or Washington State. And so there was always that. But the night we went out there and we saw those weird lights, and there was 3 of us there, and we were watching them change colors, and they were moving around, and they're turning red when he hits them with the laser. That was the point where it became very, very real to me. And it's like he said, I mean, before that, I would have gone on and said, yeah, there's weird stuff happening there. Absolutely. But there was this sort of lingering doubt in the back of my head. Maybe that movement wasn't what we thought it was. Maybe that wasn't a pebble that got tossed at us. Maybe it was something that fell from a tree. Maybe, and you can kind of write it off until we had that moment with those weird lights. And then it became undeniable. Like, okay, something is very, very strange about this place.
Yeah. And that's the more distance you get from it, the more you can sort of say, well, maybe it was something else, right?
Exactly.
Or write it off.
Exactly.
That's the one role that I think evidence can play, is that if you've got evidence of it, even if you get that distance and think, well, maybe it was something else, and then you play it back and you go, no, that's exactly what I thought it was, then that can push you over the line, I think.
See, I don't think I've had one of those moments, because I've had so much stuff happen to me during my life that I don't have one moment that I can point to and say, okay, that's the point I started believing in stuff. I've always kind of tried to be in the middle ground. Something weird happens to me and I go, okay, we'll just move on now,
I think I was always in the camp of believer, but when I was there and there's two other people with me and it was just, there's no denying this, we have an audio recording of us and you can hear the awe in our voices as these lights are moving around and changing colors and reacting to things we're doing. It just became undeniable at that point. There's no way I could deny anything at that point. I mean, before I was in the camp of believer, I would absolutely put myself, I'm a believer. I'm into this stuff. But at that point, and especially concerning Site 7, that particular area, that's when I had to just say and go up. This is absolutely happening.
Right, and that's where I am. I think with the Bigfoot phenomenon is, I would say I believe it in the sense of, I think there's enough evidence that I think this is probably something that exists, but I haven't actually seen one. So I wonder how I would feel on the day that I actually come face to face with it. And then it would be, as Tim says, like, oh, this is actually real. That's sort of a different stage.
And you've gone on a number of Bigfoot hunts, right?
Yeah. I've been on a couple expeditions with the BFRO, and then Paul's an investigator with them anyway, but he and I go out on our own quite a bit too.
And what's the most you've encountered?
Well, we've had a lot of weird experiences. There's one that we describe in the book that happened up in St. Lawrence County, which is where I live now. But there was a bunch of stuff that went on that night. We heard some whistling back at us. We heard tree knocks. We had like movement, like huge, some sort of big animal, no more than like 25 feet away from us in the tree line. But it was so dense you couldn't really see anything. But aside from that, I mean, we'd have had other experiences at different locations. There was one where we were out in this area, and we were a couple miles in, and there was nobody around, and we were knocking on trees and such. And after one knock, we just heard this kind of murmuring out in the forest. And we both thought that, wow, there's somebody actually out here with us. And I had a thermal imager with me, and I kind of shined it around, and we couldn't find anybody. And so we started heading back down the trail toward the car, which is the direction the sound came from. And we went all the way back, and there was nobody around, and there were no other cars parked there. So I still don't know what that was, but I mean, we both thought it was voices when we were out there at the time.
Like they sounded like human voices.
Yeah, but like a sort of a muffled murmuring.
Okay.
And it wasn't, when it first happened, neither one of us thought Bigfoot. We both kind of said, hey, is somebody actually out here besides us? Seems odd. I remember Paul saying something like, are there other squatchers out here in the woods?
Yeah, I suppose that could be a problem if certain areas are well known for activity.
Yeah.
How do you know you're not wood knocking to another, person wood knocking?
I've actually heard stories of that happening, where two groups have gone out to the same place and not known the other was there, and they're doing calls and wood knocks, and they're getting responses, and at some point in the night they figured it out. But
yeah, we're always worried about that when we're out in any area where we think there might be, even if there's like campers out there or something, because there's so many TV shows now, you start knocking on trees, they may knock back, who knows?
That's true too. You got to find those areas that people don't expect that sort of thing.
Right.
So talk about the first incident, and this is something that's continued beyond this. The first incident you talk about in the book with the candle, and you said this was kind of Paul's rabbit hole moment.
Well, in a sense, I think I would not quite classify it as that because. So let me explain the story first. So we had actually been out for a couple of days on a Bigfoot expedition. We were out for about 4 days, but it was a deal where we had gone out. We didn't know when we would be back because it depended on what happened when we were out there. And when we came back to my cabin and walked in, kind of rounded the corner, and I have a wood stove in one room, and on top of the wood stove there was a candle lit, burning brightly. And we started thinking about it, like Paul had slept, excuse me, in that room the night before we left. So it wasn't burning that night. He would have known that it was burning. We certainly didn't light any candles in the morning. And then we were thinking, well, even if we did leave it lit, it wouldn't still be lit after 4 days. So we went through all kinds of possibilities trying to figure out, like, how could that possibly be sitting there lit? And we really couldn't come up with any good explanation. Even the obvious explanation would be, well, somebody came in there and lit it. But even if somebody were trying to play a prank, nobody knew when we were coming back. We didn't even know when we were coming back. So you only have a couple hours window to get in there and light it when we were actually going to see it. So I think that was an experience that kind of sort of got Paul thinking that there might be more to this. The way I would kind of classify it is, if we had actually been standing there and saw the candle burst into flames, that would be a rabbit hole experience. Because there would be no way out of that. In this case, it's possible that something else happened, even though Paul doesn't really think something else happened, but nevertheless, there's that possibility. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's not quite there.
And you make no connection between this and the fact that you were Bigfoot hunting previous to it happening?
No, I hadn't. What did you have in mind, Tim?
Well, I'm just saying that, and we talk about this a lot on Where Did the Road Go? Mm-hmm. How much these phenomenon kind of cross-pollinate. And mm-hmm. I'll give you a big, for instance, for me is I do a lot of Bigfoot investigations. Mm-hmm. If someone is driving down the street, they have a roadside crossing, or maybe it's a hunter who sees one in the woods, they will tell you straight up, this is a natural animal. This is a, mm-hmm. an undiscovered primate, or this is a, relic hominid, whatever wording they choose. Mm-hmm. But when it's someone who has a sort of a habituation situation where they have property animals coming onto their property, Bigfoot creatures presumably, repeatedly, things get weird, and they get weird quick. And that's when they'll talk about strange lights and poltergeist activity and weird voices and et cetera, et cetera. And you start connecting these, and people, there's a case I'm currently working on. The guy, called me for a Bigfoot sighting. While I'm there, he says, my house is haunted too. And he starts going into all this poltergeist activity. And then he starts showing me pictures of these spirits. He says, I have pictures of the spirits. You want to see them? And I said, sure, yeah. And they look like any typical ghost photo you'd see from Gettysburg or anywhere, very misty kind of mm-hmm. outlines of these figures. But every single one of them looks like a Sasquatch. They don't look human at all.
Huh. No kidding.
No, and it's very, very strange. The whole thing is very strange. But I find that's what happens if people see them once. They're convinced they're natural animals. That's all. Mm-hmm. It's when they have these repeat encounters that the weird stuff creeps in, which makes me think, somehow that all this phenomena is more connected than maybe we gave it credit for in the past.
I think that's entirely possible. Paul and I are often asked about this because we wrote, a book about both. So people will ask us, do you think there's any connection? Kind of where we're both at is neither of us really think it's anything but an animal. But that's based on the fact that I don't have any evidence to suggest otherwise. So I go to the simplest explanation that I can, which, to me, it's perfectly believable that there is some sort of primate that we haven't discovered yet. That requires, Occam's razor approach, that requires less assumptions than some sort of interdimensional creature or whatever. But I would say I hold that position as long as I don't have any evidence. Once somebody shows me some evidence to the contrary, I'm perfectly willing to adjust that.
Personally, I suspect that there's more than one thing going on. I think there's probably I mean, there's enough evidence for a potential physical ape in the woods type creature, but I also think there might be a phenomenon that mimics it, and that's when you get some of the weird
that could
stuff.
be too. The owls are not what they seem, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just ask Mike Clelland.
There's also the possibility that there could be some sort of energy in a certain location, and the same type of energy that manifests paranormal activity might attract these sorts of beings, or even owls for that matter. So, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way to look at it, that it attracts them. It's not creating them necessarily. So you talk a lot about cognitive dissonance in here.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume most of our listeners know what that is, but why don't you explain for anyone who doesn't?
Sure. Let me make a disclaimer that I'm not a psychologist or anything.
Right.
We put this in the book, and we were thinking, hopefully nobody's going to get mad at us for, not being licensed to talk about this or something. But essentially what we're doing is we're taking our experiences in the field, and we're trying to find a framework that makes sense to talk about them, right? So the cognitive dissonance thing, when I started reading more into that, we said, this is basically what we're talking about. Cognitive dissonance is about when a person holds two conflicting beliefs in their mind at the same time, that it causes psychological discomfort, and that they will use some mechanism to try to reduce that discomfort. So, people will say, well, how could you hold two conflicting beliefs? Well, one easy way is when you believe something and then suddenly you see something that conflicts with that, because now you still hold on to your previous beliefs, but yet there's this new information that you can't refute that's right in front of you. And now you've got to find some way to fit these two together because they're in conflict. And we think that's, we use that for a framework to talk about when paranormal experiences happen. We're all sort of brought up to sort of draw these lines between what's real and what's not real. And when you suddenly come into contact with one of those things that's supposed to be on the other side of the line, that's when the dissonance is created. Suddenly you've got, okay, I have believed this all my life, but this new information that is right in front of me says otherwise. And people will take different ways to try to get out of this. And that's what we go through in the book. Is one way is just flat out denial. Just say, no, I didn't see what I saw, and I'm just going to go back to my old beliefs, which, as we were just talking about, if you get enough distance, might be okay. On the other hand, we've talked to people who it's been decades since their initial experience, and they still can't get over it. And sometimes they just don't talk about it with anybody. And that's a mechanism for dealing with it, because it's less real if you don't tell anybody about it. So it causes sort of less conflict, the less you actually have to deal with it. And then we talk more about other types of reactions to this. I guess this thing we call the rabbit hole experience, in that framework, would be basically when the experience was so powerful that the old beliefs just have to be gotten rid of, and you have to set up something new. And that can be really traumatic for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think it's there are good ways of holding that sort of cognitive dissonance sort of thing going on, whereas like we were just talking with the Bigfoot thing, I'm open to the idea that Bigfoot is an ape. I'm also open to the idea that Bigfoot may be something supernatural. Right. And I can hold both of those ideas. I mean, they both may be true, or one or the other might be true, but like I'm totally okay with holding both of those and just not kind of in an agnostic sort of way. Like a lot of this stuff, I hold it very agnostically. Like I can hold multiple views of it and say, well, this could be true or maybe not, and I'm okay with that, but I'm also not fighting it.
Right. That's the same idea with why most paranormal investigators won't investigate their own house.
Yeah.
Right? We want to pretend that nothing's going on in our house because it's easier to sleep that way. But that's cognitive dissonance too, because, well, especially when fires are lighting themselves in your house, like, yeah, there's probably stuff going on, but let's just not talk about it, and we'll be fine.
You didn't just have the candle incident. You said, and at the end of the book, you say you've had incidents for a while now with lights turning themselves on and such.
Yeah, there were follow-ups to that. There was even a period when I wanted to test it, so I got into this mode of being very methodical when I left the house, of making sure everything was off and standing in the room and announcing out loud that I knew everything was off, just as sort of a symbolic act. And yet I came home and things were on anyway.
Nice. Now, Paul had an incident that, if you can, I'd like you to talk about a little bit, where he's jogging and he saw these weird lights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually put 2 running stories in there. Paul and I each have a running story.
Yeah, and I want to talk about both of them because they're both really interesting.
Yeah, and I put them both in because for some reason I think that the activity, not just running, but for some reason an activity like that, it sort of activates enough of your conscious and your subconscious mind that I think you're sort of in a state where, like, maybe weirdness can happen. I don't know. But Paul's was, he was out running some trails with his dog, and across the trails, I've never been to this location, so I'm going off his description, but it's kind of a bowl-shaped area with a trail around it. And he looked across this bowl at the other side of the trail and saw these 3 lights sort of dancing, and seemed to be sort of following his movement. Like as he ran, they kind of kept right alongside him on the other side of the bowl. And Paul, traditionally, until he and I started hanging out more, wasn't really big into the spirits or anything like that. He says that big hairy monsters were enough for him, but he sort of watched these things and he was trying to figure out what they were and whether maybe it was a jogger with some sort of reflective tape or something. And but he said, like, the way his dog was reacting, like his dog didn't seem bothered by them at all. And so finally he sort of took off to try to catch them, and he couldn't catch up to them. They would move when he would move and stop when he would stop. And then I guess finally they just took off into the woods. And I got some text from him that night explaining this. But again, that was at a time when, like, he really wasn't too much into that stuff. So it was kind of odd to hear this kind of story from him. He would be normally telling me about footprints he found in the woods or wood knocks he heard or whatever.
And that's it doesn't quite mimic, Tim, your experience with the lights, but it made me think of them somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
Wish he experimented with it a little more.
Yeah, a lot of times when you have these experiences, you're just kind of stunned enough where you don't really think of what you think of later, right?
Yeah.
I wish I had done this.
Yeah, if that had happened anywhere else, like we went there specifically because someone had told us about the lights, and we went there, armed and ready to mess around with them. If that had happened anywhere else, I don't know that we would have had, a laser on hand or anything to kind of play with them.
I have had or heard stories from people about telling me that they saw Sasquatches and then go into the woods and then seem to turn into lights and float away and stuff like that. And no, that's all compelling. I haven't seen it myself, so I don't know that I'm ready to go there, but I've heard the stories. And it's weird for me because
my point is
spirits and such. So
with the lights and Sasquatch, it happens, not most of the time, but it happens so often where people report strange lights, mystery lights of one sort or another, around the same time, around the same place, that I feel like to not at least note it you're missing, potentially missing something. Again, it might just be that whatever conditions favor mystery lights also favor Sasquatch. It's hard to say, but I think how unusual is it to see weird lights? How unusual is it to see Sasquatch? If they're happening around the same time, same place, we have to at least make note of it.
Right. And same thing with the UFO connection, too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
A lot of cases of UFO activity where Sasquatches are, too.
Yeah, I include them under the general umbrella of mystery lights. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because then you also have to deal with the assumption that UFOs are alien.
Yeah, which I think is kind of fallen out of favor anyway, hasn't it?
Yeah, to some degree. It's finally starting to open up a little bit, but I prefer just not labeling them.
Yeah.
They're unidentified flying objects. We don't know what they are or where they come from. So, when you have was it? I guess it was when I had Seth Breedlove on. I don't remember if we talked about it during the interview or not, but he was talking about the Whitehall Bigfoot sightings.
Mm-hmm.
And, I said, were there any UFO or anything other weird? And he kind of casually said, well, right when this was happening, a UFO landed on someone's lawn and left a big circle. And I'm thinking...
That would count.
Yeah, I'm thinking that seems relevant, don't you think? I mean, I don't know how it's relevant, but that's not something that happens every day.
No, but some people get so compartmentalized that it's like, well, that doesn't count because we were looking for Bigfoot.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem with all this stuff. I mean, it's awesome that you and your friend, are kind of combining these things here and they're overlapping with the Bigfoot and ghost stuff.
Yeah, and originally the idea for the book was I had a friend of mine, Bob Canino, who was the MUFON investigator in central New York, and the original idea was that he was going to be in it with us too, and we were going to hit Bigfoot and the UFOs and the ghost stuff. But unfortunately, Bob passed away early into the writing of the book, and so that didn't happen. But that was what we planned.
But we've joked about how, like, the Bigfoot hunters think the ghost hunters are crazy, and the ghost hunters think the UFO people are crazy, and it's like, how about we look at all this stuff and see what's really there,
Right.
Now,
yeah, it's amazing where people draw the line. I'm stunned by how many people are fine with the ghost stuff, but then think that Bigfoot's ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why would an animal be ridiculous? I don't know.
Well, I think the thing with Bigfoot, especially when if you're dealing with like the Pacific Northwest or something where there's massive forests, it's one thing. But when you're dealing with areas like Florida, where it's not as dense a forest, and you supposedly have these creatures, it seems odd that no one's ever caught one or found a dead body or something to that effect. We're missing something is what it is. I believe people are seeing these things. These accounts go back throughout history. I don't think some people are mistaken, some people are lying, but I think the majority of witnesses are probably telling honestly what they saw.
Yeah. It only takes one to be right.
Yeah. But I mean, with all these sightings, you would think at some point we would have found something more. And the fact that we doesn't is kind of the monkey wrench in the whole thing. It's like, why haven't we found this?
Yeah, that's the point of I have an article in the most recent volume of Wood Knocks, the series that David Weatherly puts out, and I take a look at 8 square miles in York County, Pennsylvania, which has an insane amount of sightings from dating back to the 1800s on up to today, and that's exactly what I say. Like we need to explain this because there's no possible way there's a breeding population down there. It's just not. It's not possible.
Yeah. I hear that all the time, and people say, "Shouldn't we have found a body by now?" And I say, "Yeah, I agree. Seems like we should have. I don't know.
Yeah, and
I'm as curious as anybody.
Yeah, and that's all we can say is we don't know. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just it's puzzling that we haven't, and that's a reason I think that people will shun it off. Though it's like because we should have found a body.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking deeply about it, it's easier just to go, well, it just must not exist.
I mean, I think it would be safe to say, like, if this is a natural creature, whether it's a primate or a hominid of some sort, it doesn't act like other creatures that we know of. It doesn't act like a mountain gorilla, or we'd have one. Yeah. It must be incredibly smart, and it must have its own culture that we don't quite grasp, and possibly even technology. And by that, I don't mean boxes with buttons on it. I mean, ways to deal with its dead or like I said, its own culture, I guess would apply more. It's, but certainly mountain gorillas don't bury their dead. To my knowledge, they don't anyway. And they'd have to be doing something, for all these years. And there's nothing in the fossil record that really looks like Bigfoot, which is that's the big thorn in the side of that as well.
True. I mean,
I agree.
We do have other big apes, but not
Mm-hmm.
not specifically the Sasquatch type.
Right.
Yeah, people will compare like Gigantopithecus or whatever it might be, but the problem is we don't really know what Gigantopithecus looked like, and we don't really know what Bigfoot looks like, so we're kind of speculating on the whole thing.
Yeah, we have a tooth and a part of a jawbone,
Right.
I think, for Gigantopithecus,
Right.
So it's, yeah.
And they construct this full-scale model, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and depending on who constructs it, one, it just looks like a big gorilla that's quadrupedal, and another looks like a big Sasquatch. So, got two different theories on that.
Talk about your jogging story, Mike.
So that was an odd one.
Yeah.
I don't know how to classify it, but what basically happened was I was out on these trails that I had run multiple times. I mean, probably close to 100 times over the years. And as far as I knew, it was just a loop. There's basically a road that cuts through it. I park at one end, you run one side, cross the road, run the other side, and you're back at the car. And on this one particular day, I started out down one side, and shortly before you get to the road on that side, there's this series of plank bridges that goes over this swampy area. And I kind of use that always as knowing that I'm almost at the road. I'm almost halfway to the to the midpoint of the run anyway. And so I was running the trails. I was kind of watching my water and all that. And I remember thinking, like, my water was about half done, and so I'm going to wait until I cross the road before I drink any more water. And I crossed the plank bridges, and I kept running, and I just kept running, and after a while it started to seem like, shouldn't I have hit the road by now? But, I'm kind of in the groove running, so I thought, maybe my perception's off, whatever. So I just kept going for a while, and it seemed like it got to be a long time, and then finally I rounded a corner, and I was back at the plank bridges again. And I just didn't know how this could be possible, because I was running in a straight line. It goes around in a loop, and as far as I know, there's no way to loop back around to the plank bridges. So I don't know what to say about that. It was just one of those experiences where I use it in the book as an experience where sort of my whole sense of reality started to break down, in the sense that I was questioning everything at that point. Like, do I even know where my Jeep is at this point? Like, I don't even know where I am, really, do I? Even though I'd been out there 100 times, it was just this feeling of suddenly questioning everything that I believed about this place.
And it wasn't like, it's not a place you hadn't been before where you could say, well, you weren't that familiar with it. Maybe you made a mistake.
No, and as I ran it, because I had nothing left to do except try it again, run the bridges and try to make it back to the Jeep. And I kept an eye out for, like, maybe there's a side trail here somewhere that loops back around, but I never saw anything. It's just one loop. So I have no idea what happened, but there are lots of stories like that of people losing time or ending up miles and miles from where they started, or that kind of.
Yeah, I got lost for over an hour in about an acre of woods.
Oh, that's right.
I was with somebody, and neither one of us could find our way out. It was crazy. And we'd been through it. They were game trails that we walked, but I knew the direction we were going, and I could hear the road. That's the other thing. There was a road, very close by, and we could hear the traffic, and we couldn't make our way to it. It was bizarre. And I wrote about it in my upcoming book, where I said, I don't know what I would have done if I was alone. because it was someone there and we're both kind of like, yeah, we're big hikers, and it was kind of an unwritten thing, like we were just going to keep pushing and keep going, and we looked at each other quite a few times like, what's going on? But it was kind of a macho thing, I guess, where neither one of us was going to admit defeat. But if I had been by myself, I don't know if I would have just sat down after a while, and I don't know what I would have done. But it was, it should have taken us 10 minutes to get through there, and it was over an hour we wandered around.
Yeah, and you wonder about that stuff when you hear stories about somebody being found, starved or something, like a mile from their car because they couldn't find their way back. Who knows what was going on?
Right. Yeah.
At least to me, like after dealing with these sorts of experiences, you always wonder what actually went on there.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I have no answer. I mean, there's a word for it in folklore, as Joshua told me. He said you were pixie led.
Yeah.
It's a thing from
right.
Fae folklore and stuff. But I couldn't have told you what was happening at the time, other than I was just inconceivably and dumbfoundedly lost.
Mm-hmm. That's how I felt at the time, and I was, as far as I knew, I was running a straight loop and couldn't get lost, but I felt like I didn't know where I was.
Yeah, that's even weirder than when you're on that loop.
Yeah, that would be even more disconcerting, I think.
Yeah.
And some of the missing 411 cases follow that too, where people are walking somewhere familiar and suddenly they don't know where they are.
Yeah.
Some of the few that have actually, been able to tell a story of where they were and came back alive and okay, they're like, I was walking along and suddenly I didn't recognize my own property anymore.
Mm-hmm. I have a friend of mine who, a woman he knows was lost, because it was, probably a year ago now. She was in a car accident, which I guess could disorient you anyway, but she stumbled out of the car, and they looked for her for a whole day and nobody could find her. And then they came back the next day and found her 30 feet from the car or something. So you wonder, why didn't they find her the first time? I don't know.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, the pixie lead thing always strikes me when you hear that. But I wonder if you got to wonder if it's like you're in an area that's maybe messing with your head, like your perceptions are off, or if there's just something different about that reality and the way we're interacting with it.
Yeah, and you wonder if that's true about certain places. That place, the area where I had that experience while running, there was an odd follow-up to that where an investigator on my team called me while I was writing the book and he had heard a story from a guy he worked with about something that happened when this guy was out hunting. And he didn't know anything about the story I had in the book. And he told me this story, and basically it had to do with this guy was out with a friend of his, and while they were hiking back to their truck, they had this experience where all of a sudden they felt like they were going at Mach speed, and all the trees were flying by them, and stars blurred and everything. And it went on for about 10 seconds, they said, and then it stopped, and they found themselves standing right where they were before, but they both experienced it. And so he told me this story, and then I asked him where this had happened, and it turned out it was basically right on the edge of the land where I had my own experience. So it does make you wonder if there's something going on in that region.
Yeah. And like I said, it could be something that's affecting our consciousness in a way that we're having a not real experience that seems real. Right. Or, it's just leaving us slightly confused or disoriented, or if there's really just something out of the ordinary there. Yeah.
I mean, you could tell me, and I'm sure skeptics would, like, that I didn't actually run that trail twice that day. I just thought I did. And, that's fine. There's no way for me to argue with that. All I can say is that the second time through, I knew where everything was. Like, I knew where the muddy spots were on the bridges. I knew where there were plants growing over it. So if you can explain to me how I already knew where all that stuff was.
Yeah. So one of the things you talk about in the book is like the after effects that you see in people when they have the rabbit hole experience. You want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, and it can vary a lot depending on the person. In some cases, people move on from these things, and even though there's usually the initial fear, regardless of the person, and when you see something that is that much of a shock to your reality, fear is generally the response, kind of a fight or flight thing. But after that, as they sort of process it, we've seen people who think it's a very positive thing, like it kind of opens up new possibilities to them. And then on the other hand, we see people who can just never deal with it, and they either try to deny it or they, Paul describes in the book one woman he talked to who had an encounter with a Sasquatch-like creature on a roadside, and he talked to her 30 years later, and he said you could still hear the terror in her voice, like she had just not gotten over it. And it's interesting how I think it has a lot to do with what beliefs the person goes into the experience with.
Sure.
And how much damage it causes to try to fit this new information into it.
One of the interesting cases you talk about in here is the ghost encounter that was in the dance hall, where you actually got some decent physical evidence.
Yeah, some video anyway. Actually, we've been back to that place many times, and we've always caught some interesting stuff. But on this particular occasion, it's the best video evidence I think we've ever captured. This was on our first trip there. One of the reports was that they had seen this sort of ghost ball bouncing down the stairs, and then it kind of disappeared when it reached the bottom of the stairs. So we had a camera set up focused on this staircase. We always have this period during the night where we just leave our equipment running, and then we all leave the building and sort of just see what happens in the building while we're gone. And so we had done that. We set up all of our cameras and we left, and we were outside for a half an hour or so. And when I went through the footage the next day, I found that while we were all outside the building, one of our camera tripods, which stands about 4 or 5 feet high, whatever they are, the one that was covering the staircase, had slid several inches on the floor just on its own while nobody was around. And we happened to have another, like a DVR camera running in that room at the same time. We actually had several of them, but so it's covered from multiple angles, but so you could actually see the thing move. You can sort of see the impact from the camera on the tripod, but then we have the other cameras where you can actually see the thing move, and it's pretty clear to see there's just nobody there. And we verified that there was nobody there for at least 15 minutes on either side of that. But to me, that she was worried about what might be in there, but the way I took that was that something was trying to get our attention. Because, anything in that place could have moved that night, and we probably wouldn't have ever seen it. But whatever was there chose to move something that we couldn't miss seeing, right? One of our own cameras.
Yeah. The other one, there was one with Angela who had a ghost encounter.
Yeah, that was a tough case. This was a woman who, she had one of the nicer houses we've investigated, probably. And a lot of the ones we go to are not high-end houses, put it that way. But she had a pretty nice place, and nevertheless, she was so terrified to be in her house that every night when it got dark, she would go out, get in her car, and turn the heat on and park the car and sleep in the car. And this was a woman in her late 60s at the time. And So we went in, did an investigation, and we did find some stuff. We caught some EVP evidence and some other stuff, but I think it was a case where she had a history. She had been abused as a child, and I think there was some psychological stuff going on there. There was some activity happening, but she was sort of filtering it through this lens of these abuse experiences she had, and it can sometimes be really tough to sort of separate things out, and especially when paranormal activity is going on, which is hard enough to deal with, but to explain to somebody, yes, there is that, but that's not related to this other stuff.
Yeah.
So, we encouraged her to seek counseling, which she was already in counseling for that kind of stuff, but I kind of told her, you have to keep doing that, because regardless of what's going on in the house, like, first you have to deal with the psychological stuff, and then we can deal with the other stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting that she had abuse early on, because as Kenneth Ring has shown, that contributes to the encounter-prone personality, the type of person who's more likely to experience this stuff.
Yeah, that may very well be. There's a lot of things I think about, like just different types of, how do I want to phrase it, like mental, psychological irregularities, people who are not quite standard normal seem to have more of these experiences, and I don't know why. I don't know if that's, maybe it opens them up to different things, or I guess if you want to take a negative view, you could say that they become the target for things, but I don't know why.
And I think skeptics would say, well, it's because they're not right,
Yeah, that's the big problem, right? Because once somebody has psychological issues, the skeptical view would be, well, they're just, once they have skeptical views, we have to discount whatever they're saying.
Yeah.
But in our experience, just because somebody's got psychological issues doesn't mean they don't also have ghosts,
Well, yeah. One of the last things you talk about in the book is a guy that Paul referred you to, who was having sleep paralysis and out of body experiences and stuff, and that was his array of experiences were pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think anybody's asked me about that in an interview yet.
Really?
That's good. Yeah. Yeah, that was an interesting one, because it wasn't one where I actually did an investigation. It was basically just talking to the guy on the phone. But I think he was genuine, at least in what he thinks he experienced. And it did sound like, one of the things that he was experiencing was these sort of out-of-body experiences where he would be trying to sleep and just sort of find himself floating above his body, looking at himself. And I think that was genuine. I think there are just certain people who have a tendency to sort of separate in that way. And it seemed to happen when he was under stress. So I think that was kind of what was going on. And I just tried to explain to him that I think probably everybody does this to some extent. He just seemed to be a little bit more prone to it and remember it more than anybody else. I think that's the big thing.
And the one big experience you talk about is when he used his mother's shower.
Yeah. Yeah, this I didn't know about until I talked to him, but he'd been at his mother's. He went over to see her, and she wasn't there. And so he decided he would take a shower while he was waiting for her. So he went into the shower, and he says he wasn't in there more than 10 minutes, and came back out, and everything in the kitchen, everything in the cupboards, and out of the drawers and everything was stacked in the middle of the floor. And he stressed that it wasn't a random pile, it was stacked carefully. And he actually called the police because he thought that somebody had come in and done this, which I don't even know how that could be possible. But
right.
you have to go somewhere, I guess. Yeah, and that was a weird case because, so I talked to him for a long time and I was trying to figure out what might be going on. But the thing that kept striking me was everything he told me, like I didn't really hear any evidence for any sort of external entity being involved. And so the theory I came up with was I think he was just doing it. And that's hard to explain to people, especially when, he's saying, so what, you think when I was in the shower, like somehow I was making the cupboards open and things float out? And not really saying that because, there probably wasn't even enough time for that, right?
Right.
I don't know how to explain it, but there's this thing that happens in poltergeist cases where it's almost seems to violate time, because it's pretty frequent that you hear from people like that they were in a room, everything was fine, they turned their back on the room for a second, and when they turned around, everything was different, like furniture was messed up or stacked on each other or whatever else. And there wasn't even enough time to do that. And I don't know what the mechanism for that is. I would love to figure that out someday, but it's something that we hear quite a bit.
Yeah, it's generally called apportation of some sorts.
Yeah. Just in the sense of like things aren't actually appearing like new things, but just things changing position, I guess.
But they're doing so in such a way that it doesn't seem like they moved as much as they just disappeared from where they were and reappeared a few feet away.
Right, and there's generally no noise or anything like that either.
Yeah.
We've had cases like that where we sort of left a recorder in a room and we come back and things are different and we listen to the recorder and there's nothing on it. But anyway, to wrap up that case, what I explained to him that I thought that this was just something that he was doing, basically like a poltergeist type thing where his subconscious was sort of doing these things. Especially since he said he was kind of an OCD guy where like he couldn't stand to leave a cupboard partway open or anything like that.
Right.
Which to me made it all the more possible that like his subconscious is kind of doing the exact opposite. But at the end of the day, like after talking to him, he felt better about it and seemed to feel like he was more in control of things. And so, ultimately, I don't know what was going on there. I gave him my best guess at it, but from what I hear from Paul, he's doing a lot better with it now and doesn't seem to be bothered by it. So that's the main goal anyway. I would love to know what the truth about the whole thing was, but probably I'm never going to know that.
But in helping him, it was kind of he kind of took it well.
He did. He was very curious about it. That this obviously was something that had never occurred to him that he could have been doing it. And so once I explained that to him, it switches from you're under attack to, hey, I've got superpowers, which would be great if you could control it. But
wouldn't it?
But I kind of told him, I think if you can just sort of keep your stress levels down, I think probably things will settle down a bit. But I didn't get the impression from anything he said that like he was under attack by any malevolent entities or anything.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It sounded very much like a subconscious PK sort of thing, spontaneous psychokinesis sort of thing.
Yeah, who knows what he could do if we turned him to the side of good.
Let's talk a little bit about the role of evidence, and particularly your thoughts on the Patterson-Gimlin film, because you talk about that quite a bit in one of the chapters here.
Yeah, we sort of brought that up as, it's sort of the quintessential piece of evidence that people argue over, right? They've been doing so for 50 years. Personally, I've always been on the fence about it, because I admit that if you showed it to me today, if it had just been filmed, I would say, yeah, that's fake.
Sure.
But having been filmed in the 60s, I don't know. My position was always, I don't see how anybody could have pulled that off in the 60s. I mean, it looks pretty good. And I don't know if have you guys read the Bill Munn's book?
I haven't. Tim?
I've not. I'm familiar with many of the points made, but
it's surprising to me how I've really never heard anybody talk about it. But I mean, it's pretty much a tome. It's hundreds of pages, like 400 or 500 pages. But he goes through the entire film, like frame by frame, and analyzes it. And this is a guy who spent his career making creatures for Hollywood. So if anybody would know how to analyze it, I think it would be him.
Yeah.
And he basically concludes at the end of it that there's nothing about this that's consistent with it being a hoax. And everything about it is consistent with the fact that it's just a creature filmed spontaneously, just like they said. And so I kind of, again, like I wasn't there. I didn't film it, so I don't know. But I think the ball is in the court of the skeptics to explain why this analysis is not true at this point.
I would agree. As someone once said, state-of-the-art costuming at the time was Planet of the Apes.
Right.
And that was with a big budget. And you're looking at this with no budget, and it looks better than the Planet of the Apes by leaps and bounds because it looks real.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine who was in a costume shop a couple of years ago and sent me these pictures saying, look at these costumes, how realistic they are. This could have been what they used, and these were terrible. Just nowhere near what you get in that film.
And
we're in 2018.
And you make the interesting point that it was female, and most people just assume Bigfoot to be male.
Yeah, there was, and I've never actually gotten a copy, but Patterson had a book that was out, which I guess did have a picture of one that was female with breasts like that. I've never been able to track one down, but apparently that's true. And I don't know when it came out, whether it came out before or after the film or whatever. But so that's a point, and we should take that into consideration. Sure. But from what I understand, even the people who have come out and said that either they were in the costume or they made the costume or whatever, nobody's ever claimed that they put the breasts on it. Right? I've heard somebody, and I can't remember the name now. This is Paul's area, but I know there was a guy who said he was the one who made the suit, but he said the one he made was male, and he said that Patterson must have put the breasts on it, which I don't see how that would be possible.
Interesting.
But Munn talks about things like, just things you wouldn't think about. Like he says, when you're designing a creature costume, the hardest part to get right is the back of the neck, because you would need to leave sort of slack for the head to move, and so you always get this bunching in the back. And he says that's why, like, if you watch films, they never film the monster from the back like that. But if you watch the Patterson-Gimlin film, that's the prime shot is right at the back of the neck, right? Like, if you were filming a hoax, you would intentionally not want to be filming that part of it.
Yeah.
It's a good long, stretch of the creature walking. And what most people see is a portion of the film, that the frame where the creature turns and looks.
Right.
That's just a portion of the film. It's a much longer film if you watch the whole thing. And you get to see, it passes in front of the camera, turns and looks at it, and then you do get to see its back as it walks away.
Mm-hmm. And there's another shot which had never really been talked about, but apparently, like, by going through frame by frame, Munn says that Patterson crossed over a creek while he was filming it. And he never mentioned that or never, made a point of the fact that he crossed a creek. But if you were going to film a hoax, why would you run across a creek while you were trying to film a hoax?
Yeah.
And that's just asking for disaster, isn't it?
Yeah. That's an interesting point. And, it's so like this stuff to like be so liminal, like he's out there looking for Bigfoot, and then finds one and just, and it just falls into place in such a way that it, as good as it is, it puts so much stuff up to question.
Yeah. And that's what I mean, that's another thing I talk about it in my article in Wood Knocks. And I think it's almost like it's designed to be that way. For every expert or layman you can find that says it's real, you can find at least one, if not more, to say that it's fake. And it just seems to be so much a part of this. And I might be wrong, but I know we have copies of the original, but didn't the actual original film go missing?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody knows where it is. Munns has, I think, like a first generation copy of it.
Yeah, I know some people have some really good like early generation copies, but the actual original film is missing. That's so much like evidence across the paranormal spectrum. It always goes missing. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah, it's that trickster element of this whole thing, right?
Oh yeah.
It seems to just not quite want to be revealed. We can put some stuff out there, but it's always going to be in a way where the majority of the people are not going to see it or buy it. And maybe that's by design, as I said earlier about my hesitation to sort of get people into the spirit stuff. Like maybe that's protection of some sort. Like let's just not have people believe in this unless they're at the point where they really need to. I don't
know. So you talk about one of the responses to having an experience like this being like the obsession with it.
Yeah, which we're probably all guilty of.
Oh yeah, I am for sure.
But we kind of tried to frame that. We've seen this in clients where they have the experience, and it's an odd thing because they're terrified by it on the one hand, but they also can't stop like digging into it or going back out in the woods or whatever it is. And we're kind of trying to figure out what's going on there. And when we put it into this cognitive dissonance framework, it kind of makes sense because what they're trying to do is deal with that dissonance, but instead of trying to deny the experience, they're trying to validate it so that they can go to the other side, so that they can have the reason to get rid of their prior beliefs.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, they need the solid evidence to like fully convince them. And so it becomes this obsession to get out there and try to get that evidence that will put them over the edge in order to sort of alleviate this discomfort of the conflict. If they could just fully believe in that side, then they could eliminate it that way.
What? So you are part of your group is part of TAPS.
Yeah, we're one of their family teams, they call it.
Okay. How do you feel about the role of like the whole TV show ghost hunting type stuff? Do you think that's helped or hurt the overall perception of this stuff?
Probably both. At the end of the day, it's probably just a thing. It's probably just a wave. I think the paranormal seems to kind of come and go in popularity. And this was just the latest manifestation of it, where we happen to have cable TV and high-tech devices. I think it did bring us into an interesting era, an era of kind of trying to find hard evidence of these things that we could take to people and try to prove to skeptics. But what I say at the end of the book is, it almost seems to me like we're kind of past that era at this point, because to me, if you look at the evidence, I think the evidence, at least on the ghost side, I'm not quite as sure on the Bigfoot side, but at least on the spirit side, and in terms of like psi activity and things like that, the evidence is there. Mm-hmm. Like for anybody that wants to look at it, there's enough evidence there to know that this stuff is real. I don't really see how much value another EVP or another video or whatever else adds to that discussion. I mean, it's useful from the sense of helping a particular client, mm-hmm. But in the broad scheme of things, the quest for evidence, I don't know how much value that has anymore. And so then the question is, what comes next? And I'm not sure, but I think for me, the answer is thinking more about what does it mean that people have these experiences, and what does that in itself tell us, regardless of maybe what it is that's actually going on. We can keep exploring, trying to figure out more about what's actually going on out there, but at some point we have to accept that we're never going to have the full answer. So, what does it mean to us that this stuff's going on, even if we are never going to actually know all the details?
Fair enough. With Bigfoot, you can easily say that if we captured a Bigfoot, that would probably be good enough evidence. Do you think there's anything ghost hunting wise that would ever be good enough evidence?
Well, first, skeptical anyway about the body thing. Given the capacity of humans for cognitive dissonance, I'm not sure if a body was laying in front of the Smithsonian, if even then we would admit it. I don't know. It would be interesting to see. But on the ghost side, I don't know what would constitute that kind of evidence. Certainly, as I've argued, video and audio and whatever else, it's all secondhand. It could always be something else. So I don't know what it would be that would actually constitute that full proof. And recently we were asked the question of, suppose you did find that proof, like, what would be the result of that? What would it look like? And that's another question in itself.
Yeah.
I don't know. What if everybody suddenly was completely sure there was an afterlife? Would that be a good thing? I don't know.
Yeah, that's yeah. And I think we've talked about that before. Like if we could prove that there was reincarnation, if we knew absolutely with solid proof there was reincarnation, how would that affect our culture? Right. Would people be like, well, it's okay to kill people because they're just going to reincarnate? Yeah.
Have you seen? There was a movie called The Discovery. Robert Redford.
I have it. I have not watched it.
I happened to watch it just before an interview a week or so ago, and it's basically about that. A scientist finds hard proof that there's an afterlife of some kind, that when people die, there's something that continues on. And what it causes is a rash of suicides. Everybody who's depressed with their life decides, let's just move on to the next stage and off themselves. Which is interesting to think about. But I don't know, as I thought more about it, I think that might be it might be giving too much credit to modern humans. Because if you really stop to think about it, like, through most of human history, people have believed in an afterlife. This sort of materialist paradigm we're in now, where nothing exists after we die, is really a relatively new thing. True. So to think that if we suddenly found evidence that there's an afterlife, that suddenly that would destroy humanity, I don't know. I think that maybe just sends humanity back to where we were before all of this material.
But you figure that with most of those cultures, there was a punishment factor.
Yeah.
Killing yourself was punished. You're not allowed to kill yourself. Even in a reincarnational type of an idea, you're supposed to move upwards, and it's based on your actions in each life. So if you kill yourself, you didn't make any progress.
Yeah, and I guess if not the purpose, that's a usefulness of those mechanisms.
Yeah.
Right? You believe in the afterlife, but you don't want to go there just yet because you can't do that.
Wait your turn.
Exactly. But I don't know why that wouldn't be true now. I mean, even if we found hard scientific evidence of that there's something going on, we wouldn't know what it was. So, I don't know, I'd still be hesitant to call it quits early based on that.
Yeah. So, overall, I really like the book. I would totally recommend people pick it up. It's not super long, but it's long enough, and it's an easy read, and it's very entertaining.
Well, thanks, sir.
And I like the way you two kind of go back and forth with your views on this stuff, because you don't always line up.
No, and that was something we struggled with, because when we started writing it, we originally, we kind of were writing separately, and then we were trying to figure out how are we ever going to like sort of integrate this into one voice, and then we just decided we won't. We'll just leave it like that and let us each speak their own mind.
I mean, there's certainly spots where you agree to some to some extent, but you've had very different experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's what kind of makes it interesting.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I mean, that's what we need more of, is that vast view of this stuff. Tim, any other thoughts?
Well, I think that that approach, that vast view you were saying, and that when he was speaking of moving forward, kind of talking about what this means to the witnesses and their lives. The skeptic often say that extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence. And the thing about the paranormal is we tend to just go after the least extraordinary evidence. We go after the most mundane evidence that we could find to try to prove to people, here's a hair, here's a footprint, here's a fingerprint that, on glass. And that's all cool. I mean, I love collecting that stuff, EVPs. I'm completely fascinated by all of that stuff. But I think we have to look for the truly extraordinary evidence. And we're going to find that, I think, through those sort of interpersonal connections and these non-physical forms, and somehow that'll be the gateway into the extraordinary evidence. I think that how it affects people's lives, what it means to be a witness to this thing, and so forth.
Yeah, that may be. Jung said that science is very good at sort of explaining things that happen frequently, but it's not equipped to deal with things that happen rarely.
True.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that's I think the problem with these things is, as you were saying, like, there are things we can replicate in a lab, like some of the parapsychology experiments, but it's tiny things, tiny deviations in a random number generator or something like that. But the bigger stuff, like all of Kevin's kitchen belongings piling themselves on the floor, like, I mean, that's a larger thing, but that's going to be hard to capture because you don't know when that's going to happen.
That's what they said was the problem. All those scientists they sent out to Skinwalker Ranch that said that was the problem. They said it's not a repeating. These are different phenomena that are happening not on a scheduled time, and it was just impossible to study it because you couldn't repeat the experiment in any way, shape, or form, and you never knew what was coming next.
Yeah, and as you said with the the extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence, I completely agree with that. But the main problem I have with skeptics is it seems like no evidence is going to convince them. Like,
well, that's true. Absolutely.
Yeah, I work in statistics, and so you've got a null hypothesis, but if you've got enough evidence, you have to reject the null. And it seems like, some of the skeptics, not everybody, I don't want to lump everybody together, but it seems like some of the skeptics will just say, like, no matter what happens, there must have been a natural explanation. But if it's so unlikely that this would have happened under natural circumstances, at some point we have to say something else happened.
Yeah. Well, they already know that none of this stuff is real.
Exactly.
So there's no reason to consider it. We're just missing something. Or crazy, making it up, hoaxing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
They often use that Sherlock Holmes phrase, of when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever's left must be true. But the problem with that is we don't know what's impossible yet, right? That's what we're trying to figure out. So we can't do that first stage that you're looking for.
All right. So where is this book available?
The book is up on Amazon. People can also order it through local bookstores. Let's see, we have a website up that's rabbitholeexperience.com, all one word.
What's the title of the book again?
Rabbit Hole Experience. The Rabbit Hole Experience is the actual title. We're also up on Facebook, so people can contact us there if they want to share their own stories or let us know what's going
And
on.
they can contact you directly on Facebook?
Yes, either through Facebook or we've got links to our own teams on the website somewhere as well.
All right. Well, I thank you for spending some time with us. This was, like I said, I very much enjoyed the book, and this was a great conversation.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me, guys.
And I want to give an extra special thanks to some people who have gone above and beyond helping me out recently. Allison Cook, Dominic O'Malley, Susan Sabota, Patricia Giaquinta, and Arif Akhtar, as well as all the patrons pledging $10 or more: Super Inframan, Andy McNamara, Charles Beauregard, Craig Cisternos, Scott Morris Everett, Matthias Sunby, Robert Groom, Riker and Stark, Russell Wilcoxon, Sasha Lorg, Christopher Vaughn, Samantha, Carla Mahoney, John Eddy, Chris, Mark Brady, James Hughes, William Lovelace, Kevin Schreck, Alex Bowes, and Alfred Tuttle. Thank you all so very much. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. We have an extra bit with Michael and Tim for Patreons. So if you're a Patreon, you'll be getting that. And again, when I say I like a book, I actually mean it. I don't. I'm not going to say people should check out a book if I don't actually enjoy it. And I did enjoy the rabbit hole experience. As far as other things, we've gotten a lot of email and messages and comments from the Skinwalker Ranch documentary we did. And I'd just like to clarify a few things. A lot of people apparently agreed with our assessment of it, but some people accused us of just doing a show to trash them. We all expected to like the documentary. We had decided to do the documentary prior to watching it, expecting to like it, and it seemed like it was an important documentary. So we all went into it with, hey, oh my God, the Skinwalker Ranch documentary's out. Let's watch it and talk about it. And we gave you our honest view. We weren't trying to trash anything. We weren't trying to get people not to watch it. But we're also not going to be dishonest and say, yeah, it was awesome, when we didn't think it was awesome. It certainly wasn't bad. And I was also very clear about certain things, like I just didn't like the style, but the style's not bad. It's just a preference. It just seemed like I was expecting a lot more from it. I was expecting more groundbreaking stuff out of that documentary than was there, because there really wasn't anything. So it wasn't an attempt to trash the documentary. And it is not, you're not going to regret it if you go watch the documentary. It's well done, and it does, as Josh said, give you that context. But we don't do things to trash stuff. But we're also going to be very honest about our opinions of stuff, because otherwise, why would you trust us? If we just said everything was great, I mean, yeah, that's all well and good, but you won't know if we're telling you the truth or not, or if we're just being nice. So anyway, so that's that about the documentary. I mentioned we were having some problems with YouTube, with the monetization status and stuff, and that finally has been resolved. But honestly, it used to be that if I had an issue with YouTube and I contacted them, you very clearly were talking to a person. You were corresponding with a person, and they helped you. And I haven't had a lot of problems with them over the years, but I've had a couple times where I said, well, what's going on here? And I messaged them, and they were like, oh, well, this. And I'm like, no, that doesn't explain it. And they're like, oh, hang on, I see. And then they explain what was going on and either fix it or just, get it so I understood how the thing worked. That's not the case anymore. I honestly felt like the last couple times I dealt with YouTube, I was dealing with a bot. And, I mean, we know Google has fairly advanced AI, and it may not be. It may have been a person. They always sign a name. But it really felt like, I'd ask a question and I'd get a response of, here, check out these articles, which, of course, I already checked out and was totally familiar with. In this case, they had re-enabled our monetization, which they never should have disabled. They disabled it due to us putting up Strange Familiars, despite having permission, which is all you need to do that. And it wasn't working. No ads were running. Nothing was monetized. I wasn't getting any YouTube Premium money. Not that we make a ton of money on YouTube, but every little bit helps. And they just weren't listening. I was going around in a circle. I was getting articles about how ads are displayed on videos. And finally, I got a response of, I'm going to send this to a higher up, but it must have taken me a week of exchanged emails that really just felt like a bot responding to whatever I wrote. And finally it got elevated, and the minute it got elevated, everything was fixed. So there was obviously an issue, and their solution is to give you a bot, I guess, or someone who just doesn't know anything and is just going to respond like a bot. But it's really unfortunate. Like I said, they had great customer service at one point, but now not so much. But it is resolved, so that's awesome. Also, I have the irony in all this is occasionally people will send me other pages hosting our content without credit, without anything, and heavily monetized, usually David Paulides interviews. And if you see those on other pages, please let me know. Because, here are these other pages literally stealing our content and monetizing it, and I'm having trouble monetizing my own content. Good job, YouTube. They do take it down fairly quickly, though, if I report it, but it's a pain in the ass. So if you see something like that, or if you've reported something like that to me, thank you. I'm not so objectionable to people posting it if they're not monetizing it, but obviously these people are doing it to make money off our content. Usually us and Coast to Coast are the two I see up the most. All right, that's all for tonight. We'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.